How can we grab great sponsors for our Clubhouse rooms?
First of all, you need to make sure that you have great quality content. You need to make sure that you're involved with some big name clubs that have a lot of members so that you can use that as leverage, right? Second of all, you need to prepare some sort of documentation or materials.
How early before you host your Clubhouse room do you start advertising for it?
So I just promote it typically the day before, the day and the day of. My focus more is like just great quality content and really, really great guests. And making sure that the actual event is super, super polished and we do all the right things in order to drive the algorithm and then just hope for the best.
Today we're joined by the podcasting princess, queen of LinkedIn, absolute social media expert. You're going to want to listen up because today on the show, we have young and profiting CEO at Yap Media, Hala Taha. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. I'm so happy to be here.
Hala, I'm happy to have you here because frankly, every time I listen to you, I learn something. And let's face it, that's what we got to be doing here in 2021. Things are always changing, right?
100%. And likewise, I mean, me and you have been hanging out on Clubhouse all the time together and learning from each other. And I also highly respect you and everything you're doing with your podcast and social media. So I have a feeling this is going to be a super, super valuable conversation.
I think so. And I really appreciate that. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of Clubhouse and podcasting and how we can turn that attention into cash, I want to back it up. I want to go back to you're working at Disney. You got a great job. You're crushing in the corporate game. Why start a podcast at that time? Why would you get started?
Well, you know what? Broadcasting was always my passion. I actually was in the radio industry back in college. I was working at Hot 97 and I worked there for free for 3 years. And I actually dropped out of school to take that opportunity. I ended up going back, but I've had lots of different, radio shows and things in the past. Like I said, I worked at Hot 97. I used to do their commercials, run their Delette boards. And then I had online radio shows with a lot of DJs on the side. So I would host these like hip hop music shows where I would interview celebrities and, have my friends co-host with me. And, I was on alistradio.net, Bottom Music, DTF Radio. I was on all these different stations back in the day and hosting all these different like hip hop shows. And then I had the idea to start Young and Profiting Podcast. I was actually working at Hewlett Packard. It was my 4th year working there. At the time, I had taken a 4-year break from the entertainment industry because I had almost gotten a show on MTV and MTV pulled the plug. I was devastated and I was like, forget entertainment. Enough is enough. I tried to do it. I didn't make it in radio. I didn't make it for TV. Like I'm never going to make it. And let me get a normal job, right? 4 years into my corporate career, I was like, you know what? I've got a lot to share now. Like I was making 6 figures. I went from being a broke entrepreneur to being a very successful person in corporate. And I had all this radio background and I was like, how do I put all these passions together? How do I put the broadcasting and the business and my passion to kind of help others and lead others and do one thing? And so I started Young and Profiting Podcast. It was my first solo show. It was my first podcast. It was maybe my 5th or 6th actual show though. Like I had a lot of experience and this is the one that turned out to be a quote unquote overnight success.
Right. Overnight success. But I mean, I know your backstory. I know how much hustling and grinding and how many systems you put in place to get to where you're at now with well over 100,000 downloads per month on the podcast, which is absolutely spectacular. Your LinkedIn game is very strong as well. And I know when you were coming up on LinkedIn, you were doing a ton of DMing, right? Messaging, connecting, linking up. I'm kind of wondering at this stage in the game where you have tens of thousands of followers on LinkedIn, you also have this podcast that's flowing now. How much time are you spending actively DMing people on LinkedIn? And do you think that's still a viable tactic for growing an audience right now?
Yes, I think it's definitely a viable tactic. That's how I first grew my first 10,000 subscribers, is through the DMs on LinkedIn. And I'm still always in my DMs on LinkedIn because I really believe in engaging with your fans and having that one-on-one connection. And honestly, the way that I get Apple Podcast reviews is when people DM me and give me great feedback, and then I go like back and forth with them and then ask them for an Apple Podcast review, because it's very difficult to get those reviews. And unfortunately, they drastically impact your ranking. And so I'm always after Apple Podcast reviews. And my number one way to get those is through the DMs and making a real connection with people and asking them to copy and paste their great feedback that they DM'd me into an Apple Podcast review instead. But yes, I still do DMing. I retarget the people who like and comment on my social media posts. Granted, it's not as accepted as it was back then because everybody knows I have a podcast now. And so when I do that, people are like, yeah, Hala, we know you have a podcast. You know, when I used to do that, people would be like, oh, wow, you have a podcast? Great. Yeah, let me check it out. I'll give you feedback. So it was like way different. So it's a great strategy when you're just starting out because people probably don't know you have a podcast and you are kind of teaching them something new. For me, now that I'm more established, it gets harder and harder to do strategies like that.
Well, I think that's an important thing to understand and realize when you're growing a podcast, when you're growing a business or a side hustle is it goes through different phases, right? It seems like you're going up and you're trying to master something. And as soon as you've got it mastered, then you level up to the next level. And now you have to learn, okay, well, now how do I get to that next step, right? The first dollar is tough. Then the next $10,000 is tougher and so on and so forth. But I gotta be frank, the DMing it's just amazing to me how powerful it still is. Do you use a lot of video, a lot of audio in your DMs? Because, you know, when you're getting thousands of messages, it's almost impossible to reach everyone. How are you actually scaling out these one-to-one contacts?
It depends what it is. So I use LinkedIn automation and I use automation tools that allow me to scrape people who like and comment on specific posts and then exclude people who I already contacted. So this enables me to do things at scale where I can basically personalize messages and say like, hey, Mark, you know, thank you so much for recently liking my post. If you want to check out the full episode, you know, it was a teaser clip. Check out my Chartable link or here's my link tree and I'd love to hear your feedback on how you liked the episode. So that's typically what I do. I retarget the micro content that I put out on LinkedIn through an automation tool. And then I'll put some rules in there like don't message anyone who we messaged in the past 3 months. Don't message anyone who we messaged about a contest or something because I don't want to seem spammy. Right. The whole point of this automation and personalization is so it seems real. And then if people actually respond to that automatic message, then it's actually me replying mostly so that it does feel real, authentic. But that initial message is gone out through automation so that we can like scale these conversations. So mostly that's text because those automation tools don't support pictures and videos or audio. But when I'm trying to like reach out to guests, for example, that's a whole different story. So when I try to target guests for my podcast, especially like celebrity guests that are hard to get in contact with, I usually send them an audio message or a video message with some text because not everybody wants to watch an audio or a video. So I send them a video, an audio, and I send them a text message that kind of summarizes everything that I said in the video. And I've seen some pretty great results in getting like Clubhouse guests and podcast guests doing that. It's a little bit more personal and they know it's not like a bot or a VA when they hear my voice. So it's really effective.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, anytime you can integrate that personal touch, the video and the audio is huge. And you recently had Matthew McConaughey on the show. You've had Seth Godin on the show. Too many great names to name, so to speak. Are you reaching out to them on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on email? Like, what's your most effective platform for finding new guests for your show?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn and email are the two main ways because I have such an impressive following on LinkedIn. It gives me a lot of leverage. And so typically what I do is I'll send an invite connect and I'll say, hey, what's going on? I have a top podcast, number one. I've had Matthew McConaughey on, Robert Greene, and I have 94,000 followers on LinkedIn. I'd love to give you more details. Like, please accept if you want to learn more. Then usually, hopefully they accept. And then I go into my pitch and I ask them on the show. And for a long time, especially there was a while where my presence on LinkedIn was much bigger than my actual podcast because it's very hard, as you know, to convert people from social media to your podcast. So for a while, it was like smokes and mirrors. My podcast seemed huge, but like in reality, I had like 4,000 downloads a month, you know, and which is good, but it's not like now, right? And so, you know, it took me a while to kind of close that gap. And for me, LinkedIn was a main way to get guests at that point. So another way that I get guests is through email campaigns. And typically they're email automation campaigns or drip campaigns. So what that means is that it's a multi-step message. And so the first email will sometimes have a blank subject line, or it will just say like appropriate person with a question mark. And basically it's a very casual email that kind of goes straight to the point. My name is Hala. I have a #1 podcast. I get, 150,000 downloads a month. I've had Matthew McConaughey, blah, blah, blah. I take a screenshot of my stats and maybe like a viral post that recently went viral. I love doing screenshots in the emails. It's super effective to just kind of give that social proof, especially if it has like a timestamp, like it was last week, or like I'm trending today on Apple. And then I just say, are you the right person? And thank you so much. Really appreciate your help. Super sweet, casual, short email. These people usually respond within like the first hour after getting this message. I don't know what it is. It's like psychology. They feel obligated to tell me if they're the right person or not. And so they respond back and they say, either, yes, I am the right person, and can you give me XYZ details or fill out this form, or where's the stuff to book? Or they'll say, no, I'm so sorry, I left the company, but talk to Joe, and here's Joe on CC, So I usually always get filtered to the right person, and then we can take it from there. So those are my two main ways of getting guests right now.
The right person. I love this idea, and I love the idea of keeping it short and sweet and concise. When I first started podcasting and guest procurement, I would send out these long, detailed emails with tons of links and all this information. And then when I started getting the same back from people that want to meet a guest on their show, I was like, I can't read this. I'm just not going to read it. So, I mean, keeping it short and sweet is absolutely, that's a beautiful idea. What about Clubhouse? Super active on Clubhouse, hosting some of the best rooms on Clubhouse. How has that impacted your ability to procure new guests for the Young and Profiting podcast?
Yeah, so I've been putting together a lot of great panel interviews with Clubhouse influencers, and I've met a lot of different like Instagram influencers and things like that. And so, yeah, I had like Natasha Grano on my show. She has 2 million Instagram followers, totally met her on Clubhouse. But other than that, honestly, I've been using a lot of my podcast guests and bringing them on Clubhouse. And so I've been using Clubhouse as a way to re-engage my past guests and continue that relationship by bringing them on Clubhouse for like a second episode, whether they're on a panel or whether it's like one-on-one. So for example, I had Nir Eyal on my podcast. He always talks about like habit forming products and like habit building and stuff like that. And so we did a great episode on Young and Profiting a year ago, and now I'm going to have him back for like an exclusive interview on Clubhouse in the Human Behavior Club. And it will be like his second appearance on Yap. We'll record it, put it on the podcast, and then we get the Clubhouse exposure. So I've been using it kind of as a way to reconnect with my past guests because I've had such great guests. I haven't really found too much success getting guests on my podcast from the platform, because I find that like the really big names aren't necessarily on Clubhouse, and I'm really after like celebrities and top bestsellers. And so I feel like I'm going to be the one bringing in those people on the app, not necessarily the other way around.
Well, it might be that because you build up this name, because you're hosting these prolific rooms, I feel like eventually everyone's going to be on Clubhouse, or not everybody, but it's going to become much more mainstream over time, right?
Yeah.
And when that time comes, who are they going to go to? They're going to go to Hala Taha, who's hosting.
I hope so.
I mean, that to me seems like when you, and this is something I heard from Gary Vee a while ago, and it just made so much sense, is be the host of the party. Everyone wants to go to the party, and if you're the host, you have that leverage to bring in new people. I can say that personally, I've landed quite a few great guests from Clubhouse, and that's simply by being in the rooms and engaging with people, much like yourself. Another thing I'd like to hear about, Hala, is your thoughts on Clubhouse monetization. They just announced very recently that they're going to start monetizing rooms. What are your thoughts on Clubhouse monetization? Overrated, underrated? What do you think?
Well, here's the thing. I think smart people have been monetizing on Clubhouse before these monetization features were turned on, right? And so we were just talking offline about how I landed 2 sponsors for 2 of my rooms. I made almost $10K like in 2 weeks, like putting together the program, whatever, soliciting sponsors. It's crazy. Like there's a lot of money hanging around. Like brands really, really want to show up and want to be a part of this, and they don't know how. And it's kind of like the wild, wild west where it's just like a land grabbing going on. Everybody wants to get a piece of it, and the influencers have all the power. So as Clubhouse turns on these monetization features, the power is going to be removed from the influencers and it's going to be more distributed because Clubhouse is going to want a cut of all of these sponsorships. So I imagine that Clubhouse is going to put together like a sponsor portal and like kind of manage the sponsorships that are going on and make sure that they get a cut of it or that it's standardized in some way in terms of the pricing. But as of now, it's totally the wild, wild west. And so there's lots of influencers like myself who are trying to capitalize on that in the short amount of time where it's going to be available. So they just put out this tip feature. And from my understanding, everybody has it. I have it now. I don't know if you checked your app.
Yep.
And it should be really interesting. I'm hosting my first event since that came on my account tomorrow night, and then podcast office hours on Wednesday. And I have a feeling that I'm going to get a lot of tips, especially during podcast office hours, because everybody, me and Mark, we do these rooms together, and everyone's always like, how can we pay you? How can we repay you? And we always just say, we're just doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. But now they actually have a way to pay us, which is going to be interesting to see how that goes. And, I think we're going to have to figure out our like donation strategy or wherever we're going to put this tip money, because I think it's a little corny. And for me, I'm not going to keep any of the tip money. I'm going to figure out how it goes to charity or something like that, because I don't think my income is going to come from tips, right? But for example, I was using the Koji tip jar. And this was it's a third party extension. And basically you put it in your IG link in bio and people can tip you. And I turned it on for one day and I got $300 in tips.
Hey.
So people love to tip. It's pretty interesting.
Well, it's becoming part of the social media experience. You've got, I think that YouTube and TikTok have done a really good job of these super chats and donations and whatnot. And it seems natural. It seems like the obvious first level for Clubhouse. But I want to talk about the sponsorship model, because this is something that I think that a lot of people need to hear, because negotiating your own sponsors, negotiating your own deals is where the real money is going to come from, right? So let's break this down. You host a room with some great people. These people also sponsor the room, and they're paying you upwards of $10,000 to do that. You got to tell me, how did you open up the conversation, and how can myself and other after hours entrepreneurs, how can we grab great sponsors for our Clubhouse rooms?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And okay, so first of all, you need to make sure that you have great quality content. You need to make sure that you're involved with some big name clubs that have a lot of members so that you can use that as leverage, right? And you need to make sure that you've got your clique on Clubhouse of influencers and people who are going to support you and you support them, just like me and you have done, right? Second of all, you need to prepare some sort of documentation or material. So I have a deck and a programming schedule. And essentially, I have a deck that talks about me, who I am, my stats, my social reach, my rate cards for social media, for podcast commercials, for Clubhouse now, and then the other Clubhouse rooms that don't even involve me. So I was telling you offline that I'm going to be selling Breakfast with Champions, which is literally the #1 room on Clubhouse every single day. They get over 20,000 people in and out. And so I told him I was doing sponsorships, and he was like, well, I want in on that, right? And so now I'm selling his room. I'm selling a room for Jordan Harbinger. Like I'm going to be selling other people's rooms too now. And so I put together all this documentation. I put together a programming schedule, and now we're running an email automation campaign, reaching out to the same brands who've sponsored our podcast, and going to see how that pans out. And it's just really interesting because, like I said, the brands are all over this. They want to be involved in Clubhouse, and there's no formal media company that is offering this. For podcast commercials, for example, there's Advertise Casts and Ad Results and all these different agencies. For Clubhouse, there's nothing. I think that there's like a web page that just popped up that's doing something similar to me as in terms of helping brands and influencers connect. But other than that, I haven't heard of any other platform or anything kind of facilitating these sponsorships.
No, I haven't either, which to your point gives you as the creator a lot of control. which I think is great, right? But it also is a challenge too, because there's no precedent as far as what is a room actually worth, and how can I prove that the room is worth that? So how do you go about selling that to someone? You say, hey, I'd like to have you sponsor a room that I host on Clubhouse. We range, let's say on average, 100 people at any given time. 100 people doesn't sound like that much, I wouldn't think.
Well, first of all, I would say it's usually 1,500 people. Like, let's say podcast office hours. Usually it's 1,500 to 2,000 people in and out of that room. In and out. You got DireCon stats, right? You can get all the people who are in the room. They even give you the Instagram and Twitter handles now. So what I've been doing is saying, well, not only will you get the live audience, but we'll retarget them on Instagram for you. And so we'll shoot everybody a DM who came to the event, even if they only came for a minute, and we'll give them the office hours notes. And we'll ask them for their email, and then we'll include you in that email as well, right? And so basically giving them a way to retarget the audience members, even giving them that list of here's all the Instagram handles, and you guys can do your own retargeting via paid ads if you want. And so I think closing the loop is the big differentiator in terms of the brands coming back and keep sponsoring the show. Then the other thing is like all these add-ons. So like social media, like not only do you get my live Clubhouse room, you get me promoting it on LinkedIn to my 100K followers. Not only do you get my live Clubhouse room, but we're going to record it and upload it to my podcast, and it's going to reach 25,000 people who listen to the episode, and we'll do a 90-second commercial for you. So it's like all these like add-ons that are worth something, right? Yeah. The other thing is when you invite influencers, so certain influencers, you may have to charge like an influencer fee or something like that. But for the most part, a lot of people just want to get their name out there and want visibility. And so it's a win-win for everyone to be recorded on my podcast, to be a part of it, right? And so you can leverage those influencers to promote the event too. So creating a flyer that has, Joey, if you guys know him on Instagram, he has 4 million followers. He's been doing some of my events. Create a flyer for Joey. It has the brand's name on it. He puts it in his stories. Joey's happy because he's on my podcast. The brand is happy that they're getting exposed to 4 million people, and everybody wins. So I think it's just like coming up with these packages and these synergies, and then putting a monetary value on it. The worst they could say is no. And what you can do to open the door is have a test price. So a lot of the times I give them like a reduced price, and I say, okay, first test is this price. Also, same if you buy Ford, same price, right? This lower cost. And then if you want to continue one off, it's this more expensive price. So starting off with a test price is key too.
So Hala just laid down the exact framework on how to sponsor your room. This is actually brilliant, 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 brilliant. So I want to hit on one of these key points here, tools. I love practical tools that after hours entrepreneurs can just leverage immediately. And that one tool you mentioned here was DireCon Stats, correct? Which gives us access and knowledge of who actually joined our rooms, who left. I actually am not familiar with it, but I'm definitely going to download and check this app out too.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. They do club analytics. It tells you retention time. So for example, the retention can range anywhere from like 6 minutes to 16 minutes. If you were at 10 minutes, it means like you were okay. If you hit like 14, 15 minutes retention, that means your room was awesome. So that's something else to, look at as well, because it will help you with understanding, did your room perform well? Did it not? Do you need to kind of bounce around the moderators more, being more engaging? Were you guys boring or long-winded? It kind of gives you insight to that as well. So having the analytics is super powerful. So DireCon is the industry leader for that now. And like I said, now they even provide all the Instagram and Twitter handles for everybody who came in the room. So that's huge for retargeting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's massive, massive, massive. What are some other apps? Is there any other app that you think that any Clubhouse influencer, every Clubhouse influencer needs to have on their tool belt? What app should we have?
You know what? I think that this space is wide open. There's maybe 20 apps that came up. The only one I'm using is DireCon, to be honest. If I could be 100% honest, sure. The only app I'm using is DireCon. But yes, there's so many different apps that have popped up to try to close that gap, whether it's the Koji tip jar that tried to close the monetization gap. There's so many features that are lacking on Clubhouse, which is why all these apps are popping up. But for me, I've only been using DireCon for analytics.
Well, I like it. I'm definitely going to check that out. How early before you host your Clubhouse room do you start advertising for it? Do you just go live one day, or do you plan for it and start promoting it weeks in advance?
So I just promote it typically the day before, the day and the day of. I think that with these point in time events, it's pretty hard to kind of it could get old really fast, I think, if you overdo it.
Yeah.
And so I typically just really focus day of, maybe the day before. The only exception is for my recurring stuff. So for podcast office hours, I do it every single Wednesday. So that's been getting some momentum because people look forward to it. It's always at the same time. They kind of recognize a lot of the moderators who come in and out. They're following a lot of us. And so that has been getting great traction. And similar to you, I started an email list from that room where I say, DM me or email if you guys want the podcast notes. And now we're sending out a calendar invite.
Yep.
To the room to see if it could help drive a lift. So today's going to be the first or this week's going to be the first week where we send out a calendar invite, but that also might have a lift. The thing is that these Clubhouse rooms are so frequent. You know, when I first started, I was thinking, do I create like a LinkedIn event linking to the Clubhouse room? And, you know, we were trying to go really hard, but I didn't see much of a difference. It's kind of like you have no control because the app controls how your stuff is visible in the hallway. It's like,
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do. Maybe 50 more people will show up if you really go hard, but is that worth all the effort, or is it worth more to try to just coordinate great content and great influencers to attend and really focus on that to drive yourself in the hallway and to make sure that you're at the top of the hallway instead of spending all this time promoting off the app? I say make the best content on the app and you guys will be promoted within the app. So my focus more is like just great quality content and really, really great guests. And making sure that the actual event is super, super polished and we do all the right things in order to drive the algorithm and then just hope for the best. Because I think it's going to be a hard sell to get people to remember to come to your event from social media.
I agree with you 110%. Especially the point about having great guests, having Hala and her group of friends. I love how you say that, Hala and friends. Because to me, more so than almost any other platform, Clubhouse is about collaborating with other creators, almost more so than any other platform, which is a lot, which is a big thing to say because collaboration is king. Collaboration is king on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram. But for me, I think Clubhouse, it takes it to the next level.
I love Clubhouse for that reason.
I can't tell you how many people, awesome people. I just had Jasmine Starr on the show last week. Never would have had a chance to chat with her without Clubhouse. So it's just a really cool place. Jason Pfeiffer, yourself. I have a few other people lined up, but I don't jinx it. I never announce a guest until after I've interviewed them. So
I'm a
little
smart.
I'm a little superstitious about it. I had a couple flake out on me. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. So yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. These are the things you learn after doing this for years. So before I let you go here, Hala, I got to do a quick overrated, underrated session with you. All right, you ready?
Okay.
Overrated, underrated. Twitter.
Overrated.
Overrated, underrated. 80s music.
Overrated. I'm not a fan.
That's fair. I'm on a little bit of an 80s kick right now. You'll hear up on this next question. Overrated, underrated, Tom Cruise.
Underrated. I like Tom Cruise. He's a good actor.
He is classic. Doesn't age though. Whatever he's doing to stop from aging, he's got to keep doing it. Podcast sponsors, overrated, underrated.
Underrated. There's some new stuff with sponsors. I used to say it's not all that, but now that I'm becoming a big podcast, there's actually a lot of money in sponsors.
Awesome.
Because you can double up on commercials. You can monetize your old episodes through dynamic ad insertion. It's really, really, really lucrative if you do it right.
Excellent. You listen, y'all got to check out Hala Taha for more tips on that. She's going to give it to you straight. A couple more here for you. Live video streaming, overrated, underrated.
Underrated.
Working remotely.
Underrated.
My final question here for you. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, Hala, what are you going to tell yourself?
10 seconds with myself 10 years ago? Keep going, girl. It's going to get great.
I love that. Because I'll tell you what, it's so easy to second guess yourself when you're not getting the listeners, you're not getting the downloads, you're not getting the money. It's so easy to say, what am I doing this for? But props to you putting in the work and making it happen.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Hala. Talk soon. Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed this episode. I've got several other episodes right here for you. Smash one of these videos to make sure that you don't miss out on the tips, tools, and tactics of industry experts. Let's take that side hustle full time. Smash one of these links.